for attending this audit committee meeting. I'd like to call it to order. It's now 10:07 a.m., July 20th, 2023. We have enough members to conduct the meeting. So first item on the agenda is approval of the May 18th, 2023 Audit Committee meeting minutes. Okay, can I get a motion to approve? Okay, it's been moved and second. Are there any discussion on any changes? Hearing none, call the question. All right, the minutes have been approved. All right.
You asked about the quorum thing. Do we have what's a quorum in a committee meeting? Does it matter?
Yeah, it does matter. And so for this quorum, or for this committee, I think we only have five board members. I'm
That's
trying
correct.
to see. So we have four.
Four
So four are here. So we only would need three. So four of the board members of the actual audit committee are present.
Okay, great. Next item on the agenda is a internal audit activity briefing by Mr. Emil, AGM of Internal Audit. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Greenwood, members of the MARTA board, members of the MARTA Audit Committee. My name is Emil Zanov, the AGM of Internal Audit. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a briefing of the Internal Audit Department activities for Q4 of MARTA's fiscal year 23, beginning April 1st and ending June 30th, 2023. Next slide, please. As we normally do, we would start with the operational audit group activities. It was a very busy quarter for the operational audit group. The team issued 9 audit reports, which is quite a bit above what we normally do in a quarter. Of those 9 audit reports, 5 were rated low risk, which is good. That's a good thing. 1 was rated needs attention, which is kind of our medium risk level. And 3 were rated high risk. And on the next, this one and the next slide, I will spend just a little bit more time on the high risk items and some of the low risk items as well. But beginning at the top, review of transit-oriented development. This one is a kind of a medium level risk, which we call needs attention. We identified 3 significant findings, which the management team accepted, and they're working to remediate those. Some of them were related to shortage of labor and people who had left the organization. So a few things had to be tightened up and positions refilled, but management has accepted the findings and is working to remediate them. Further, we audited the homeless outreach contract, the contract we had with Hope Atlanta. We did not find any significant or moderate findings in that contract, so fairly well done contract which operates as intended. The PCART audit identified 3 significant findings, 3 moderate findings. Those findings have been accepted by management, and they're already working to fix them. I will be reporting to the audit committee in future audit committee meetings as it relates to the status of the corrective action plans. From a CIP perspective, the Clayton County O&M facility, operations and maintenance facility, this was an interim audit mainly focused on the project management of the project. We also looked at some work orders and deliverables on those work orders. We sampled approximately 1/3 of the deliverables in the work orders that have already been issued. And based on our assessment, it appears the project is moving along based on the project timeline and the original design plans. We did not, during this audit, look at invoice controls or payments, but strictly on project management and deliverables. Going to the new rail car procurement, this is the largest procurement in the MARTA history, so we have been auditing various different elements of the Stadler project. This particular audit focused on the invoice controls specifically related to the Stadler invoices. We did not find any significant or moderate findings. Based on our testing, it appeared that the invoice controls as it relates to the Stadler payments are working and operating effectively. And just to give you heads up, during the next audit committee, we should be reporting out on an interim Buy America audit that we have just finished with Stadler. My team was in Salt Lake City examining their documentation and records as it relates to that element of the contract. Let's move to the next slide, please. Again, continuing with audit reports issued strictly in this quarter. Well, this is okay. There you go. The direct. Can you go back one more slide? Okay, there you go. Attracting and retaining employees. That audit identified 4 significant findings and 4 moderate findings. The significant findings related to the lack of broad-based retention strategy for employees, the need for career development and advancement opportunities which need to be expanded. Another finding was related to the need to create and deploy an employee handbook. And finally, to define in a formal way a succession plan for the organization. The function has accepted the findings, and I know that they're already working on some of these recommendations to put them in place. The next 2 audits are more of a compliance type audits. The SOC 1 reports are something we examine every year. These are control reports that we receive from many of our financial institution partners, banks, as well as healthcare providers. We review those to make sure that their controls inside of their organizations are operating effectively as attested by their external audit firms. The police property and evidence audit is an audit that's part of the requirements to satisfy the CALIA certification for the MARTA Police Department. We do that every year. And what we do during this audit is we go to the police property and evidence room and we sample 100 items from their high-risk items. And what constitutes a high-risk item is things like weapons that are being seized during arrests. So weapons, drugs, jewelry, cash, those sorts of things, and we want to make sure that the records and what exists in the property room is there. So we did not find any exceptions as we went through our procedure. So that was it was a clean audit. Finally, Indian Creek Station interim audit. We looked at project management. We identified 3 findings for Indian Creek Station rehab. Absence of governance mechanism, insufficient projects change documentation and change management governance, and the need to enhance the contractor oversight in that project. Overall, there were 13 significant findings and 8 moderate findings that were identified and documented in various different audits during Q4 of fiscal 23.
Okay. Mr. Zanoff, I have a question before
Yes.
you complete your presentation. On the Indian Creek Station, so what does that look like when you say absence of governance mechanism? I mean, what are we looking for in that space?
I think we're looking at a better mechanism to document project changes.
Okay.
How they get initiated, approved, communicated, and just put into place. I know there's already been some staffing changes in that project, and steps are being taken.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can just
Carly might be able
add
to-
on to what Emil was saying. We know Indian Creek Station's it is a complex project. There are 5 different construction packages involved at a minimum. Emil's quite right. So the prior project manager has been removed, and as of May, we've had a new project manager in place doing very well, and the new project manager reports directly to the chief capital officer. So there are no layers of management in between. So there's a lot more direct oversight on the components of the program. So. We've reached agreement with the contractor on June 21st, so now we're starting to see some motion, and I think we're actually waiting for DeKalb to issue the land disturbance permit to get us moving into the next phase. But I think in response to what Emil has found, we would say he's quite right. when management discovered some of the inefficiencies of the oversight system, we made those changes.
Great. Thank you. That's one project that we are very much interested in seeing move forward, as you're aware, and there's a lot happening in that space. And so I'm glad to hear that the project is still on course. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to the next slides. The next two slides contain audits that we have discussed in the past, because these are prior quarter audits that have some issues that are still in process of being remediated. One is around the capital improvement program, a lot of some of the policies and procedures. And we're continuously working with Carrie and her team. The excessive absenteeism, which is the last line that you see on the slide. The due dates are September 30th, and obviously we'll verify the corrective action plans and their implementations. I had a meeting with the project manager there, Peter Bruno, and based on at least the verbal dialogue that I've had with Peter, there's a lot of things that have already happened in that space. One example of some of the things that have happened is the hiring of several superintendents that will be responsible for attendance and bringing people back. So the authority already sees some positive results from putting those resources in place. The Office of Research and Analysis has also helped a lot to clarify and clean up some of the data, define definitions and calculation methodology of how these things get calculated, etc. So I'm giving you a verbal update because I received the verbal update. I'm satisfied with the verbal update, but as you know, we always verify with documents what has been done and what has not been done. So in the November Audit Committee meeting, I'll be able to tell you what we have been able to verify, but I'm satisfied with the progress that's been made so far. Okay, next slide. The direct pay process, as you can see on the slide, the 5 findings that were significant and 1 moderate have been closed. So I just wanted to say that the corrective action plan has been implemented. With the next audit committee, we'll drop this off the slides because we're satisfied with the progress. And I think we have a lot fewer direct pays now than what we used to have when we started the audit. So a pretty significant drop in that space. Finally, the non-revenue vehicle, which was a prior quarter audit, we received a verbal update that these corrective action plans have been implemented. However, as I said, we need a little bit of time to verify with documents and records that those things have been implemented and they're sticking and they're remain in place. So during the November meeting, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to close this out. Let's move to the next slide, please. Switching over to our IT audit group. They issued one fairly big audit around identity and access management to our computer systems, and what that means really is the controls in place to make sure that we know who logs into our systems, who moves around our systems, are they legitimate users or legitimate devices, etc. We identified 3 significant findings and 1 moderate finding in that audit. We have 2 more audits that at the end of June were in the stage of field work. And what that means is field work means we're just now collecting and reviewing the data, the records, the reports, the spreadsheets. So by November, we should be done with these audits and get those reported to the audit committee. Those have to do with support for critical enterprise applications. So this is one of the few audits, I should say, that don't necessarily relate to cybersecurity. And the third one is IT hardware asset management, which is a very foundational control that's used for production support, but also a foundational control around cyber. As the audit committee knows, and I keep repeating, and forgive me for that, but I'll keep repeating it, we're very paranoid as it comes to cybersecurity. Everything around the world, around the country tells us that this is a very, very high level of risk for any particular organization, but especially for critical infrastructure organizations. So I tend to get pretty paranoid as it relates to the environment. So we focus a lot of our audit hours in that area. And I know it's a pain for my friends in IT and cyber, but that's just the way it is. Let's move to the next slide. These are prior audits that we've discussed in the past. We're tracking them to full remediation. 14 of the 27 findings of various different audits have been remediated. There's 13 that are still in progress, and we'll continue to meet with the relevant operational personnel until those things get fully remediated. So we're staying in constant contact and engaged with them very frequently. Next slide. Okay, then switching finally to our contract audit group. The contract audit team issued 19 contract audits during the quarter. The vast majority of them clean, 18 of them. One was rated as needs attention. They exited the quarter with 15 projects in the pipeline being worked on. They're always very busy, and you'll see that on the next slide. During the quarter, they identified $286,000 in unsupported cost in one particular contract audit. Let's move to the next slide, please. This is our fraud, waste, and abuse summary, and I will start from the right side of the slide over to the left. There was one previously reported allegation related to the MARTA Employee Charity Club. We just kicked off a kind of full scope audit in that area. They've welcomed the audit. We just started it, so you know, we'll go through the process and report back to the audit committee. Going to the left-hand side of the slide, the newly reported allegations during the Q4 period. We referred one to labor relations and operations because it was not related to fraud, waste, or abuse. One was referred to legal as it relates to compliance with, you know, our HR policies. And then one last allegation was related to working a second job during the same hours. At least the last two of these allegations, we've done some preliminary work. And based on our preliminary work, that doesn't appear to be something of substance there. We'll kind of close them out with the appropriate stakeholders, but I expect those to be closed without substance over the next quarter. Next slide. This is just a one-slide summary of our performance and numbers for the entire fiscal year because now we're covering Q4. Just want to take the opportunity to give you a very quick snapshot for the entire year. Beginning with our contract audit team, they issued 121 audit reports during the year, which is on the high end of the spectrum for any particular year. We usually issue between 90 and 110 audits in any given year. This was on the higher end of the spectrum. And you see some of the unallowable cost in overhead rates and also unsupported costs identified in various cost or price analysis. The operational audit team issued 15 audit reports, also at the higher end of the spectrum for any particular year. We're typically at about 12, 13 audits. This year we're at 15. We issued 3 IT audit reports, and then we completed 2 investigations during the year. So overall, pretty productive year, not just the quarter, but the overall year.
Emil, could I ask
Yeah.
a question? Sure. While we're on this slide, I assume this is, we have time and material contracts. We're talking about overhead, undocumented direct costs, correct?
Yes.
Was it focused on one particular contract area, or was it just all across the board?
When we talk about, and I'm assuming you're referring to the overhead rates in that first sub-bullet with the italics, we have in any of these, cost and, time and material labor rate contracts, we audit the overhead rate based on what's allowed under federal acquisition regulations. And I'll give you an example. One of the overhead costs in any company is the cost of bad debt, right? That's not allowed under federal acquisition regulations, so we have to take it out, right? So we look for those bad debt, like bad debt, yeah, when you have to write off uncollectible receivables. So that's not allowed under FAR, Other costs have to be well documented. So we review those, and there's a few cases where, we have to disallow certain costs and reduce the overhead rate accordingly.
Right, I understand how the audit process works. My question is Is it isolated in one or two areas or just broad-based across the board?
This is across the board.
Right. And so future invoices, they basically have to just back that out of their revenues they've already billed for? Or are these picked up before the billings have been processed and paid?
I have to go back and look exactly at how the process flows time-wise. I believe these are, for the most part, future invoices, but I have to go back and give you a more definitive answer.
Just,
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah,
So,
okay. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is the final slide, just a little bit of heads up for the audit committee, what's coming down the pike for the November audit committee meeting. I would like to suggest to the audit committee to review and update the MARTA audit committee charter, which was last updated in 2013. That was 10 years ago. I have already reviewed the charter, and it's really timely, but I think it's time maybe to update it, and I'll be helping out in the process. So I don't foresee any big issues based on my preliminary review. We need to update the internal audit charter, which is the charter that governs my organization. Similarly, it was reviewed many years ago. It's still it's a timeless document, but there's a few things that can be updated. You know, we live in a different world today than we lived 15 years ago or 10 years ago. Finally, we should expect to have Crow come to the audit committee, and is usually the case, give you an update with the results of their annual financial and single audit. We're going to add one advisory review as it relates to how tax revenue gets allocated to different buckets inside of the authority. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Greenwood, that concludes my presentation. Back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Pond, you have a question? And I have one also.
yes, I'd like to go back to your first slide, and maybe this is more of a Jacob question. First of all, my observation is your TOD team has been doing a wonderful job. I've heard a number of board members compliment how great a job you guys are doing. But my question is a developer, until they get a funding from a organization, a financial institution, is going to pay absolutely the minimum amount of money they can for anything until they get funding. So what is the follow-up there? I mean, how much money are we talking about, number one, is my question, and what is the action to collect the funding, or collect the fees that were committed?
I have to go back because I can't remember on top of my head. I think Jacob can probably speak to that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Pond, for that question. Actually, we had an asset manager who left us in September. And so with the departure of our asset manager, we had some things fall behind. But it's since been corrected. We've added 3 new team members, a senior asset manager of real estate, senior asset manager of TOD, and an asset specialist. And we've been working with Raj's team to add a real estate accountant. So this audit actually shined light on the fact that we did not have redundancy in our department. So when a critical employee leaves, you know, we didn't have those processes that could be, you know, continued. And so the amount, I believe, is less than $100,000 that needs to be collected. So we've collected probably most of that up to this point, and we'll continue to, you know, tighten our processes.
So you have these TOD agreements, so what is the action item if they don't pay promptly when you notify them?
Yeah, we had no TOD findings. These were agreements. We have 17 ground leases, then we have another 58 other agreements, and so it was actually the other agreements that are managed by the Office of Real Estate. Despite the title of the audit of TOD, there's some overlap between the management of the documentation, both TOD ground leases that you're referring to,
Yeah.
but it was actually most of the findings were on the real estate side, the Office of Real Estate side.
Okay.
But we welcome the audit. I mean, we're trying to, you know, always improve and get better, faster, stronger, and, you know, Emil and his team did a great job, and so we've already corrected most of the items that they've identified. So thank you.
Having run a business, cash is king, and that's people that don't pay their bills are not my favorites in life. So.
Absolutely. I hear you. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question on slide number, I'm assuming it's 9. It's the prior IT audits with open findings.
One more back.
That one, yeah, that one there. So I know that some of these things have been around for a while, and we're trying to go through them. Are these things, and I guess it's a broad question, are they things that that vendors are maybe be responsible for modifying so that these findings can go away, or this is just our issues?
It's a combination of both. We have responsibility for some of them, and vendors have to help out with some of them. I'll give you an example. The first one around third-party IT risk management, that just, we rely on third parties for a number of critical technologies,
Right.
and we need them to do certain things. The same is true around the findings on line number 3, the TSN pen testing findings. Those have to do with equipment upgrades that have to be supplied by a third party, and then deployed around different parts of, the authority. And I'm intentionally keeping these things vague because, we don't want to distribute information to bad people. But so some of that is related to vendors, and some of them is our own thing.
Okay,
I mean, just has to be done.
And Emil, can you just speak to the idea, because it's past due, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not in process, is that correct?
That is correct in the vast majority of cases. In many cases, and I'll pick up the TCSN pen test, a significant progress has been made, but they've been pretty transparent with me that they're looking to get it done by, I think, the end of September or October.
All right. Yeah.
Which is beyond the original timeline, but I'm satisfied with the logic behind that timeline extension. And then hopefully when that's done, we'll get to drop it off. So the vast majority of these, they're being worked on, and sometimes we have to go back and say, no, we've closed the door, but it's still cracked open.
Right.
We've got to close it all the way. From a due diligence perspective, so we continue to report it to the audit committee just because we got to get significantly satisfied that things are really, really wrapped up and the controls are really effective.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I know that this one here it has quite a bit of the high risk, like you had mentioned, and I know we always keep this on the radar. I'd just like to see some of it disappear because it tells me that we're still at high risk in these areas, and so appreciate you bringing that to our attention. All right.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Frieda?
So I know we've mentioned cybersecurity, and I understand we put that as a major focus. I don't remember 3-4 years ago when we
Yes.
added it to the audit committee,
Yes.
Mr. Pond, and
Yes.
several of us felt the need to make sure that we were focusing on that. I appreciate that we now have a new manager coming in for that area because of one area that I just didn't feel like we could be without someone in the focus on that. And I know that we want to kind of step that up just a tiny bit next year and look at things maybe even more broader. So I appreciate the opportunity that we continue to look at this whole focus and make sure that we're very much aware of all of the issues that exist with our agency and cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah,
Mr.
just a few. First of all, I'm free to follow up a little bit. I hope the new guy's about 25 years old and understands all this new stuff, because you don't, I mean, when you're looking for senior or experience, this is not an area that you want experience in, because I can tell you people my age don't care. I mean, they just don't want it to screw up. That's all we are interested in. But, so anyway, but I'm glad to see the attention that you all are paying to that. And I do want to make just a brief comment, not necessarily about audit, but we just got back from a board members meeting in Birmingham, of transit board members. There were a lot of folks there, a lot of administrators and a lot of this, and it makes me proud and happy to see the work that you guys are doing at MARTA. I mean, I continue to be impressed by the quality of the work and the quality of the people that are here and the work that they're doing. And it made me think there about something that comes up a long time ago about how important it is for you guys that are doing these jobs here to know what else is going on around the country and in the world. And as I think it's important that you realize that 90% or 80% of your job may be to do whatever your job is. The other 10% or 20% is to figure out how to make it better, how to do it better. And you can't do that if you don't know what else is going on around the country, what other people are doing. And what I'm getting at is that the lady there from the Dallas area transit, they are 100% staffed in bus drivers now. They reached that point. And the one point that she made, and you guys that were there can correct me if they're wrong, was that it wasn't one thing that they fixed to do that. It was 8 or 10 things that they had to fix, and they had to deal with all of them. And so I thought, but I wanted to compliment you all on the job that you're doing. And as I've said before, when I came on this board, I came from 25-year history of MARTA, and none of it was good. I mean, we'd had some spit and cuss fights over the years with MARTA, but I continue to be amazed by the job that you all do here. But I just want to say how important it is for you all to understand and know what else is going on around the country and around the world in order for us to make this organization the best that it can be. So anyway, thank you, and that's my
Raj, that is not an endorsement for the travel budget.
Maybe it is, a little bit, but,
Yes.
one of the things I was just mentioning to Jacob a minute ago, one of the things that, I mean, we had this 3-day meeting, and the last hour is on financing. You know, where's the revenues coming from? And we spent an hour talking about something we should have spent the whole 3 days talking about. And I think maybe we at MARTA, and maybe this is a board deal and not is we need to ask APTA if this is the right organization to convene a meeting of the key financial people in the country about how they're doing revenue, where their sources are coming from, and to focus on the things that we need to do in order to access different financing areas. And this guy from Chicago talked about TIFs, which is tax increment financing. Well, we all got TADs and all that kind of stuff that we're involved in, but that we don't have access, value-added tax that we don't have access to here. And that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out, the board role in that and to do that. And I mean, you guys are the smart guys about how to do this. And if you know what's going on around the world, let's figure out what we need to do here in order to move that. The future of transit is not in riders. I mean, I know you got to have riders, but the future of transit, I don't think we're ever going to get back to the ridership we had. I think what we're going to figure out is that our system has to serve the people that need it. And that ought to be our focus, in my opinion, is to how do we get the revenues that we need in order to, without the fare rate going to $25 a ride, how do we get the revenues we need in order to provide the service to the people that need it? People need it to get to work. People that need it to get to the hospital. Those kind of folks needs to be our focus in my attempt. And I think the new ways of financing are the ways we're going to deal with that, in my opinion. So anyway, and this is probably the wrong place to get on my soapbox here, but
Okay, absolutely, I understand, Mr. Floyd. And I do want to add also that our trip in Birmingham was very fruitful. And they brought some things that we just hadn't thought about that I think is another way in which we can begin to explain the benefits that MARTA delivers to the community, but also the opportunities that MARTA offers. And I just want to share a couple of those real quick. And one of the things that they decided to do was to kind of redefine the way that he explained this industry, not as just as a transportation industry, but as a tech industry. And they were saying everything that we do in this space is really technical. And that is what the youth of tomorrow are looking to go into, these fields of tech. And one of the other things that I thought was amazing is that they were able to do process their applicants all in one day. They interviewed them, they had screened them, they did all that in one day, and they went away with a letter of contingency offer that day. So they didn't have to wait through a whole process. And this is what DART is doing. And like Bill said, they're 100% staffed with drivers. And so Anyway, that was some things that we took out of that. And then also the financing piece, which is what I think there's opportunities that we can find other ways which we can do just that.
One quick question, because this came up, and I just realized.
Go ahead, put your mic on, Bill.
Taking these microphones, I just realized that, and so, because I've been reaching around to talk to people but they mentioned drug testing issues, and I've not heard much about that here, and the influence of the fact the approval of marijuana in different states is having on how we deal with drug testing issues, and I've not heard you all talk much about that. If you haven't, I haven't been around when you did it, and because I'm not sure. I mean, being in the construction business for years, 30 years ago, is you want to smoke marijuana or take drugs, you can do it, but you can't do it and work here. And I would suspect that driving a bus is the same way. You know, if you can't do that and work here, but how the changes in the drug laws are affecting our ability to hire people, not hire them, and how that happens. And I don't know. Maybe there's a lot more going on than.
No, I think it's a good point. We suffer the loss of otherwise talented individuals at all levels of the organization because they fail drug testing, right? And as you know, we have unannounced drug testing from time to time at all levels of the organization, and it's key also when we're talking about initial recruitment. There's been no relaxing here in Georgia or here at MARTA, especially when you talk about positions that are safety critical, like driving, or anyone that supervisors a driving position. So it's not just the person behind the wheel, but the person making the decisions with the wheel. So we are still every bit as limited. If anything's changed, it may be that there may be states out there where an individual who's predisposed to drug use may move because they can find work there, but they were never going to be our employee.
Well, thank you for the comments. I appreciate it, Mr. Zanoff. We're through a little curve there, but I think all of this has to do with how it integrates into this operation and eventually what happens in this audit findings that we have throughout this enterprise, and how we, as we try to talk about getting ahead of it and help it in a way to make it a lot more productive. So, but anyway, that's all I have. Any other board members have any other comments? Well, we thank you for your presentation very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. There is no other business before this board. Then I'll call the meeting to adjourn. Thank you, board members. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr.